New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
New Thought Media Network is pleased to present The Inclusive Church, Ideas and Resources for Leaders of Multicultural Ministries. The Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown. Tuesdays at 12 noon Mountain Time. Join Tracy and her guests as they go deep and share practical tips and resources you can use in your ministry. And now let's explore the Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown.
Hey everybody, Tracy Brown here. Oh my, we have wild hair today. And maybe that's good because we're going to be talking about a topic where people are going wild. Politics and the inclusive church. Woo! Whew. It's national election season in the United States of America. And even when I say that out loud, United States, it's like, no, we're not really very united right now and haven't been for a while. But politics is one of those topics that people think, oh, we shouldn't talk about that at church. And I don't know why that is true. So we're going to spend the next 30 minutes kind of unpacking some of the myths and misconceptions and misrepresentations about politics and an inclusive spiritual community. So let's just start with the idea that what is politics? Politics is the process that we use in order to govern, in order to have people elected, in order to come to a common understanding of how we will live in our society. But you can have politics in the company you work in, right? People coming together to create a culture and to create standards and to agree about how they will and will not work together. You can have politics in a school because it's how are people coming together to create the environment and the culture and to determine and agree to what are the common things that we can expect from one another as we do the business of education. We do have politics in our churches, not only denominationally, but in our individual spiritual communities, because it's people coming together to create a culture and to define how they will work together, what the priorities are, and who will represent the common voice. So I don't know why people think that politics should not be discussed in church when everything we do, anytime we're with any group of people, is driven by the political system or the process that we have of bringing people together and navigating, negotiating, or creating the way that we will work together. So politics in itself is really neutral. It's just a system. It is just a process. But it seems to me that many of us have decided that the word political and the political process is something that is either dangerous or nasty or difficult. And we separate ourselves from it or we label it in a negative way. So I want to start there because I actually don't believe that politics is something that should not be talked about in our church settings, because it is active wherever we have people coming together. And our spiritual communities are microcosms of the macrocosm of the society, or that the society we live in. So no matter where we are in the world, in our spiritual community, it surprises me that we don't expect that we will have all kinds of people who represent all the different kinds of people that exist in our neighborhood or in our city, town, state, or nation. So if we are a microcosm of the macrocosm, then the reality is, if we just are talking about politics in the general sense in the United States, then we should be expecting that we have members and guests and visitors who are Republican, and we have members and guests and visitors who are Democratic, and we have members and guests and visitors who identify as independent, and we have visitors and guests and members who are libertarian, and right, whatever existing parties there are, including people who are unaffiliated, even won't even identify as independent. If that's happening in the society as a whole, it is happening in our churches. Or maybe I should say, I believe it should be happening in our churches. And I paused there because I have been in a number of conversations this year, as well as prior to this year, with people who are surprised. Like, they think, oh, I'm in a spiritual community and everybody believes what I believe, and we're all living our lives under the same spiritual principles. And so they just assume everybody is a member of the same party they are. And then certain things are said or done, and they're surprised that the person that they've known for the last 8 years, that sits one row behind them, and they talk in the fellowship hall, every week or several times a month, is from a different political party or identifies with a different political party. And then all of a sudden there's this discomfort, or even worse, there has been some animosity between members of spiritual communities based on political party. Always surprises me. But I guess it doesn't shock me. It surprises me on principle, but it doesn't shock me because I've been asked to comment about it so much, and I've seen it in groups that I have been a participant in. So, one, politics is not a bad word. It is a system that exists anytime we have people operating together or building community together. Number two, that we are simply in our spiritual communities a microcosm of the macrocosm. And so we should expect to have people who represent all different parties and approaches to governance. So if we are truly being inclusive spiritual communities, there are some practices that I think as leaders we want to make sure are happening, not only in the election season, but beyond. This first one is such a basic that's not just limited to conversations or discussions related to political parties and elections. And it is that practice of listening for understanding, not agreement. And if you, as a leader in the spiritual community, take the opportunity to have people or help people practice this year round, even when there's not an election going on, then you will have a better chance of it happening during contentious election seasons. Listening for understanding, not agreement. Now, I have used this as a practice in classes when people have opinions, strongly held opinions about whatever it is we're talking about. And I will challenge, two people who may be kind of at odds with each other. I will challenge them to simply listen for 3 minutes or 2 minutes and have person A talk about what they believe or what they feel or what they understand for 2 minutes, uninterrupted, and they get to share whatever they want to share, what they believe, why they believe it, how it affects their life, etc. And then I have person B come forward with their voice and summarize what the other person said, what person A said, with the why. And, if there's an emotional piece in there, describing it and demonstrating that they understand what the person is saying. Has nothing to do with agreement. Listening for understanding, not agreement. And then I'll have person B ask person A, did I get it? Did I capture the main points or the most important things about what you shared? And sometimes the answer is yes, you got it. And other times the answer is no, you actually interpreted what I said, or you misinterpreted what I said. What I said was, and then they repeat what they said or what it meant to them. And then I'll have person B take 2 minutes and, talk about their view, not in comparison, just their view and why it's important to them and what it means to them. And then have person A do the same thing and play that back until they're both actually able to say, I understand what you are saying. I understand why this is important to you. And then we have a conversation about the difference between understanding someone else's view and agreeing with it. So you can do that with classes. You can do that as simply a practice related to in better listening. You can use it as a spiritual practice related to mindfulness. And of course, it's helpful if you've already been doing that, but you could start right now and do that during this, this season, leading up to and during and after the 2024 elections in the US, in order to help people hear each other. And sometimes there have been a number of times I've used this in spiritual community, and after the understanding is there, sometimes I'll ask this question for everybody in the room, not just those two people, to talk about. How is listening for understanding a representation of the spiritual quality of love? When you take away the need for agreement and you are focused on understanding, you're showing compassion, you are more likely to be able to demonstrate empathy, but some aspect of the spiritual quality of love will be present when you actually are using this effectively. So number 4, a practice is, really it's not a practice. It's a recognition. It's a kind of a self-diagnosis. When you are having a very strong reaction and you realize that it is based on a political continuum, to ask yourself the question, am I listening with political ears or spiritual ears? And often, whether it's related to an election or whether it's related to the internal politics in your workplace or in your church, what happens is people are listening based on, well, who said it and what did they say and what did they mean? And we're layering all these assumptions and implications based on political party or job title or hierarchy of some sort, even though we know that in the circle, in a spiritual circle, there are lots of different responsibilities, but every voice is equal based on, or is valuable. I won't say equal, but valuable. Because even in our spiritual communities, right, people have different roles. And so if I'm speaking up as the chair of the board or chair of the leadership council for my member community, I have some responsibility to share certain kinds of information. And so it's not personal. It's not that I am wielding my power. It is, I have this information and I need to share it. But no matter how grounded I am in what I share, or how grounded someone else is in what they share, there's still that question of how am I listening? Am I listening with a sense of separation and hierarchy? Or am I listening from the perspective of let me truly take this in as a way to process this information? And so this whole idea of listening for understanding and then doing some reflection about, am I listening from a politically divisive place, or am I listening from a spiritually grounded, all things are possible, there are no mistakes in the spiritual evolution of activity and life? I'm listening from a different place. Now, ideally, if I'm a leader in a spiritual community, I'm also speaking from a spiritually grounded place. But for this moment, I'm encouraging you to think about where am I listening from? Now, whether I'm speaking or listening, I want to be grounded in my spiritual values and definitions. So again, we go back to definitions because that counts for so much in everything that we do. So am I interacting with this person and with this idea or topic from a place of oneness? What about the law of cause and effect? Am I really paying attention to how this effect that I'm reacting to, like, do I want to go to the causal level, or am I even able to go to the causal level? And if not, can I choose a new first cause right now in terms of how I engage with this person or with this topic? And it's like we're not victims. We are not victims. We may be, depending on our demographic, we may be a target of unfair treatment, but we don't have to be a victim to that policy or practice. We can be negatively affected by it, but we don't have to be, in terms of how we view ourselves and the world, a perpetual victim. Now, I'm always careful when I talk about this because, yes, in some ways, I am a victim of racism, but I'm not, right? Racism does exist. There's no denying that. People have called me out of my name and used a racial slur hundreds, if not thousands of times. And I'm the target of their ignorance. I'm a target of their anger. I'm a target of their fear. I'm a target of their misunderstanding about the truth of life and love. I'm their target of their behavior. And some would say, yes, you're a victim. The moment that person refers to you and calls you out using the N-word. But the way that I tend to think of it is that I am affected by it. I don't like it, but I know who I am, and I do not let their use of that word define who I am or define how I live my life. And so many of us, depending on what demographic groups we're a part of, we have had that experience. Someone using a racial slur, someone using a word that refers to sexual orientation or gender identity in a negative way, or someone who denigrates another group of people based on age or the language they speak or the accent they have, right? So are you a perpetual victim, meaning that you actually live your life taking on that oppressive term or idea as part of your identity? Or do you see yourself as a target of it, and then you develop coping mechanisms, affirmations, and ways to approach those situations that reinforce the value that you have as a child of the divine? And so looking at those spiritual values and definitions for love and unity and harmony, looking at and holding on to spiritual principles like oneness, the law of reciprocity or the golden rule or the platinum rule, but looking at it and integrating it into the way that you talk about politics is so critical. It's not easy, but it's important and it's critical so that I don't get hooked into a tirade of judgments and comments that that I decide that it is not for me to call a specific candidate, any specific candidate using the equivalent of slurs that are insults simply because I do not agree with that person's proposed policies or ways of treating people or the things that they say they will stand for when they're elected. So whether it's on a local level, a state level, a national level, or even, where you are looking at international policy, it's really up to each one of us as leaders who want to be inclusive. It's up to us to monitor our own language and our own way of taking up the language that others are using. One side note, and then a couple more comments. One side note is, as I was saying, it's up to me to decide how I am going to label or talk about different candidates or different people who are running for elected office, or the people who support them. This is critical. I already said it, but I'm going to say it again in this context. Understanding, and in this case, respect, is not linked with agreeing. And I think a lot of people have that really confused and mixed up. Like, I don't agree with you, and so you're an idiot. I don't agree with what you want to do once you get elected. And so I make up negative names or use negative names to describe your physical appearance. Or I don't agree with you, and so I have to argue with you in order to prove that I'm right. and you're wrong. And so we live in a time where I think there has been quite a bit of forgetting how to be respectful in disagreement. But our spiritual grounding leads us there. I don't have to make you bad. I don't have to use every negative descriptor or adjective I can think of. I can simply say, I don't agree with you, or my priorities are different from yours, or based on my spiritual belief system and the values I hold, I think it's important that people are treated this way and that decisions are made that way. That's a very different conversation or very different presentation than simply name calling and and focusing on making the other person wrong. So for those of us who are leaders in spiritual communities, if we stand in that place of having our language being guided by our spiritual values and definitions, we have a better chance of demonstrating that we are inclusive and creating an environment where all different kinds of people can actually learn spiritual principle and do spiritual practice together. And some might say in spite of their differences. But I actually believe it helps us and we are willing to learn from the ways people are different from us, when we ground ourselves in spiritual principle and when we share spiritual practice together. So I'm just thinking, is there anything else I'm going to say about politics in the inclusive church? Yes. So most of what I've said so far is it's a combination of being a proactive mindset and a proactive pattern of behavior, as well as how we might react to what's going on. But there's one more thing I want to say that I think is really more proactive in nature. And a lot of times in spiritual communities, there's a misconception that if you do or say anything that's related to politics, you're risking keeping your exempt tax status. And that's not true. What would risk your tax status is if you were consistently promoting or requiring people to vote for a specific candidate, telling people who to vote for, that could be a problem, or which party they should join and be an active member of. But simply talking about the issues that are at hand, or even talking about individual candidates and how their publicly communicated policies and programs align or don't align with the spiritual principles that and values that your denomination or your church teaches, that's not a violation of tax exempt restrictions. It is perfectly fine to say we want to support candidates who, through their words and their actions, demonstrate that they have respect for all people, because all people have been created by the same creator. So, right, all people are worthy of respect. If that's a value that your spiritual beliefs holds fast and holds strong, it is okay to say, we encourage you to vote for candidates who have demonstrated a respect for this. Or you can do, let's say there's a local election and there are 4 candidates running for city council representing your part of the city. then yes, you could say we've done a comparison of all 4 of the candidates on these 3 values or themes. And here is the information. And then let people decide who they want to vote for based on having some information. That is not a violation of IRS standards around churches and non-exempt, or I'm sorry, exempt status. The other thing that you can do, which I really do encourage our spiritual communities to do, is that you can have an ongoing program that is about advocacy for being involved in the system that, in a way that serves the values and the teachings of your tradition being evidenced in the daily lives of your community. And so one major way to do that, that has nothing to do with supporting any candidate specifically, is to educate people about voting and the process of voting and the practicalities of voting and what you have to do to vote, and encouraging them to vote whenever there are elections, local, state, or national. And when you do this over a period of time and you consistently do it, then it also becomes clear in your community that it's not about supporting any one specific candidate or one specific party, but it is about reminding people that, yes, you are spiritual and you have responsibility to be a part of the collective consciousness in our city, our town, our state, our nation, because opting out of the process does not, it is a decision that you can make, but it doesn't help to influence the system that we all are affected by. So those are just some thoughts about politics and the inclusive church. If our goal as an inclusive church is to really include all kinds of people, to stand up for those situations and those resources that people who are in our communities need, then it is important to be involved. It is important to speak up throughout the year about programs, policies, legislation, and conditions that impact in our people who have different disabilities in our community. It is important to take a stand, not just show up during Pride Month and have some pretty banners on the wall or at the altar on our program, our printed programs for an event, but to actually throughout the year have a voice for compassion and love and fairness and equity to be shown, because it's what we believe spiritually is what the infinite intelligence actually has in the design for our lives. So whether it's racism or sexism or homophobia or transphobia or treating people with disabilities differently, whether it is the discomfort of engaging people from different age groups or who speak different languages, whether it is taking a stand for people in all socioeconomic classes to have access to education and other resources, no matter where it is, we in our spiritual communities have a responsibility to take our values and our teaching to the streets, not in a necessarily negative way, definitely not in a violent way, but in an active, visible way. Active and visible for individuals, active and visible for our community. So that's Tracy's take on politics and the inclusive church. I don't know. I invite you to think about it. You may or may not agree with me, and I'm okay with that because that actually is one of the foundational pieces of engaging with the topic of politics. It's not about agreement. It is about understanding. It is about respect. It is about multiplicity, not everybody believing or being expected to believe or be the exact same. So thanks for joining me today on the Inclusive Church. My name is Tracy Brown. For more information and ideas about being inclusive in multicultural spiritual communities, please visit stainedglassspirit.net. And I'll see you again next week.
Thanks for watching The Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown. Join us again next week at 12 noon Mountain Time.